Hello, everybody. Welcome to our UCFB Insight series. I'm Mark Clement from BBC Radio and Television. And one of the common threads of my profession is I'm lucky enough to get to hear people's own stories. I do it as a broadcaster and I do it as an event host, as I have actually for UCFB, hosting their Future Leaders Graduate Conference and indeed launching the Global Summits in Melbourne. So the chance to sit down with some of the leading lights from the football and sport industry really is a dream job for me. How did they get to where they are now? How close was it to where they expected to be? What were the principles that guided them along the way? What advice would they give to the next generation? I do hope our guest on this episode has answers to some of those questions. Otherwise, she'll be panicking as we welcome the CEO of Women in Football, Jane Purdon. I noticed a couple of qualifications you've done recently were creative writing. So is that art of storytelling a sort of understated skill, do you think, of business that's becoming increasingly apparent?
Yeah, you have done your research. I'm impressed. So for me, I decided in kind of middle age to do something new, and I think that's point number one, that you never stop learning, and that would be part of my it's part of my story, and it's part of what I'd say to younger people. You never stop learning. Hopefully you'll get to a point, as I did, where you can pursue a passion project and it doesn't have to be something that's relevant to your job. But having said that, I think you make a brilliant point. Storytelling is so important, and I've not just done lots of creative writing, but studied a lot of the theory of narrative and stories and how we are completely attuned to hearing stories and get really engrossed in them. And I found it super helpful when we do things like, write our story at Women in Football. Who are we? What are we about? What are we trying to do? I think it's a fantastic skill to have and to spend a little bit of time working on and learning. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of overlapping with some of the sort of coaching and mentoring I do with execs and football managers, and also some of the exec education work I'm going to be doing with UCFB, that ability to package what you have to say in a tight context, neat bundle, and inspire the people that you need to inspire, I would say has never been as important a business skill as it is as we move in these unprecedented times of change.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that we absorb information and lessons better when it's told to us as a story, somebody's story. We get engrossed in it and we remember it. Now, without giving away too much, you and I had a little chat in the preamble about a marvellous night I had in Augsburg in 2011 in the story.
Wow. You've set that up beautifully, so don't stop now.
But if I just said to you that women's football in 2011 was very different from how it is now in 2020, and that was women's football in 2011, you wouldn't have absorbed it. You'd have switched off a bit. Because I told you my personal story about going to the Women's World Cup in 2011, you were engrossed, right? You'll remember it. So exactly. It really does get the message across.
Cool. Of course it does. For those that don't know about the organisation, do you just want to give us the basics before we start drilling down into how you got to where you are now involved?
Sure. So Women in Football, one of the things I love about us is we've got one of those names and it does what it says on the tin. We are about women in the game, and we are there to support, champion, advocate for, help every woman working in football who earns her living from football, however she does it. Every woman who wants to work in football, every man who supports our aims, because we know we can't change the world by ourselves. This is humanity's issue. It's not just women's issue. And we're also there for the football industry, because we know that it's an industry that knows it needs to change, that is changing, that wants to change, importantly, but doesn't quite always know how and needs a little bit of help to get there. So as part of that, we celebrate women's stories. We try to highlight some of the unusual stories, women working in the game. some of the stories of work that women are doing that'll make people think, wow, I didn't know a woman could do that. We help women by offering personal development and leadership development. So wherever they are in their career, we have a training offer or a support offer which can help them. And we work with the industry. We ran a campaign called What If, which have a look at it on Twitter, #WhatIf. And by that, we call out to the industry and say, what if we all took one action and did one thing to help change the landscape for women in the game? And the response has been brilliant. All corners of the football industry, from clubs, governing bodies, UEFA, the FA, commercial organisations, UCFB, Barclays, Adecco, Premier League clubs, I could go on, have responded, and with genuine actions that make a genuine difference. So that's broadly what we do.
So that campaign was to tackle sexism, empower women and girls. At the risk of starting with a tough and political question at first about you, just how challenging has your road been from that perspective? Have there been lots of junctions where a blockade has been put on you because of your gender?
I think it's a very mixed story, but to give a short answer to that question, on the whole, no. And this is one of the things that I'm always very keen to get across, that the football industry is not institutionally sexist. It's not. But having said that, we have to remember that while it's useful to talk about the football industry as one thing, it's actually made up of lots of different component parts. Even professional clubs, there are 92 Premier League and EFL clubs. They all have their own history, their own culture. But let me tell you a story, Mark. My first job in football in 2001, so nearly 20 years ago, I joined Sunderland Football Club as their club secretary and in-house lawyer. And the chairman, Sir Bob Murray, said to me, I like having women in the organisation. I like having them on my board. I like having them in my leadership team because they bring something different to it. And he walked the walk on that one. There were women on his board. There were women on his senior management team. And it was the most affirming statement about gender diversity that anyone had ever said to me, ever. And that anyone was to say to me for the next 15 years. So that's how I started, in an environment where women were absolutely welcome and valued, and the value of diverse teams was recognised. Now, I've worked in other places, and along the way, yes, there have been bumps, and I also hear now a lot of stories from women working in the game, and unfortunately there are still the kind of roadblocks that you describe, and that's very difficult. Women in football, we can help individuals, we can signpost them to some pro bono support from law firms if they do hit a real problem, and we have done that. But when I think about our strategy for the organisation and what we'd like to do, I'd like to wind that down. I'd like to never have to do that again, offer a woman support because she's suffered discrimination and we actually think it's actionable. She's entitled to legal redress. So we work very hard with the industry and to help them, recruit and develop and retain best practice talent. But I have to say, in fairness to the industry, there are many, many pockets of very good practice. No one should be put off building a career in football. Yeah.
No, quite. And actually, I'd like to get to a stage where I didn't have to bring this up as part of an interview. I could just talk to a human being about their career, as we're going to do. So take me to Sunderland as you walk through that door. Who was that person? What had been her ambitions? What had taken her to that point of getting that job as club secretary at Sunderland?
Well, I wasn't born in Sunderland, but I was brought up there, hence the lack of accent, because my parents weren't from Sunderland, but I was brought up there.
You poshed up or something like that.
I get this all the time. No, I've never changed my accent. I've never changed.
All right, fair enough. Go on.
But my dad did take me to Roker Park, as was back in the 1970s. We're going to, Mark, and that was quite rare. But I loved football from a very young age. When I was 19, I went to university and took the opportunity to start playing very badly. I'm not a natural athlete or sports person. It wasn't a talent I was given, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself. And then I qualified as a lawyer, and that was that. And, you know, I had no thought that I might one day work in sport. And then famously one day, 20 years ago nearly, one of my best friends rang me up and said, Sunderland are advertising for a club secretary. You have to apply. And I did that thing that a lot of people, particularly women, do. And I said to my best friend, I went out and bought the paper, looked at the ad, came back and rang my best friend back. And I said to her, I will never get that job. And she was brilliant because she just nagged me. She was so on my case and on my back all the time, every day. She called me or messaged me to say, have you applied for that job yet? And I'm so grateful to her. And it's a piece of advice I always give to young people now. Always, always, always apply for the job that you don't think you're going to get, because you just never know, and you lose nothing by just applying. So to my astonishment, I walked into the Stadium of Light for my first day of work in July 2001. The club had had a club secretary since its foundation. It's one of those roles that all clubs have, but I was the first lawyer that they'd employed. And I think that says something about Premier League football, as Sunderland were in 2001.
Yeah.
The clubs were just growing and getting to the point where it made sense to have an in-house lawyer. And I wasn't the first one in the Premier League, but I think I was the second. So my role was the traditional club secretary role, which, yes, did involve booking the team bus, and my assistant Susan used to do that. But it did involve bringing some legal scrutiny to the player contracts and the transfer contracts, which hadn't happened before, but now they were growing to such a value that it was worth having a pair of legal eyes on them. So I did.
So Jane, can I just check at that? So at that point, we're only talking 20 years ago, there was still, if not an element of the Wild West about, there was certainly an element of the chairman had agreed a few bits and it wasn't very neat and tidy, and we didn't have all the finicky detail that we certainly do now.
I was astonished when I read my first player transfer agreement, because I came from a background of working in law firms where we dealt with property transactions, corporate transactions, and this thing was a page long. It was page A4, and that's nothing against Sunderland. That was the industry standard. So gradually, I had to start thinking about what protections might we need in transfer agreements. What do we need to say? Is the wording right? Is it legally watertight? And gradually build it out like that.
Amazing. It is astonishing, the pace of change. But I mean, you obviously made a sizable impression on the football industry then, and it obviously did on you, because your next role was a move up to the stakeholder, the Premier League.
Yeah, I did 4 years at Sunderland. One of the things that I really want to talk about is that during that time, we suffered a relegation. Now, Sunderland sadly have a history of relegations, and this one was particularly catastrophic. We had to make 90 people redundant. We had to dismantle the team because their playing contracts were all too expensive, and build a new team under Mick McCarthy. And it was a very, very traumatic time. And I learned quickly, in my second year working in football, that it's not all stardust and sunshine. It can be a really tough business, which can really affect people's lives in a bad way. You know, people losing their jobs, people with mortgages to pay, and families. But nevertheless, as I always like to say, my last day of employment was spent celebrating promotion from the Championship. They just got re-promoted. But the Premier League sort of approached me about a role, and it was a very, very tough decision to leave my childhood club, to come back to London. But after a lot of agonising and heartache, I took wise counsel from somebody, believe it or not, the chief scout who worked at Sunderland at the time, a guy called Dave Bowman, who I got on with really well. And he was one of the few people I took into my confidence about it. And he said, you just got to do that. We'd hate to lose you, but biggest, best league in the world, you've got to do it. So yeah, 2005, I moved to the Premier League as head of football administration. And my main role there was to scrutinise the player transfers and contracts. So I previously drafted them. Now I was reading them to make sure they were all in alignment with the rules, to register the players once everything was in order with the documentation, to maintain the Premier League rule book, which actually grew to be probably 60-70% of the job. And weirdly, for reasons I don't quite understand still, I did the fixture list.
You did it. With the computer, obviously. You didn't sit there with a piece of paper going, Arsenal are going to play Villa.
Yeah, completely. There was actually a lovely guy called Glenn who worked for an external organisation, and he had the fixture computer, which disappointingly was just a very ordinary little laptop. It wasn't a big thing with loads of wheels and spitting out ticker tape. And we used to do it in conjunction with the Football League, because you have to, because police requirements will look at all the clubs in their area, not just who's in whatever league. But yeah, I used to go to Preston about this time of year, so a bit later, sort of May, for a week in May, and hole up in a hotel in Preston and just do the fixtures. But I enjoyed it, and that's part of the joy of a long career, that you end up doing some stuff you never thought you'd do.
Well, you can demystify this for a few of us then along the way, because there are sort of elements that have to be incorporated before the computer takes hold, isn't there? Those two teams can't play each other in a late kickoff, and they can't travel here. So there's a lot has to be organised before you actually press go on the software.
So every club is given a fixture questionnaire before we press go on the software, and we ask them for all the stuff like that. What are the dates to avoid? And my great friend Dave Cookson, who headed up this process for the EFL, he had this wonderful idea, and one day I'm going to do it. He said, Jane, when I retire, I'm going to spend a year going to all the events that we get requests from on the fixture questionnaires. So, for example, in Bristol, we can't have the Bristol clubs at home on the day of the Bristol Balloon Fair. Doncaster, there's the Nottingham Goose Fair. What the hell is that? But it stops football in Nottingham. You've got Notting Hill Carnival, Manchester Pride, the Great North Run. And I thought that would be a wonderful way to spend a year just going around to all these things. But yeah, we had to plug all those in. Wow. Any special requests, like clubs who'd just built a new stadium, often asked for their first game to be away, just to give them that extra week to finish, getting everything right. And then there are certain rules of the fixture list that as probably all fans know, it pivots around December time, and you have to make sure that the away programme and the home programme are balanced, it's all fair. But a surprising amount of it is down to the computer. We don't twiddle them out with it too much, and any constraints that are built in normally are at police request because of Nottingham Goose Fair or the Bristol Balloon Festival or whatever. Yeah.
So this is a time of unprecedented development, of growth for the Premier League. So on the one hand, how did you see the organisation morph? On the other hand, who looked after you and helped you to grow? Because presumably by the time you left the Premier League, they were a very different organisation to the one that you first went in. And yes, I guess you're doing some of the same functions along the way.
My role did evolve and change, and I think you're right, Mark, it evolved step by step as the business of the Premier League evolved, particularly as more money came in. And when I left, I was Director of Governance in 2015. I'd started in 2005 as Head of Football Administration, and I think it's fair to say that at that point, back in 2005, the Premier League didn't really do governance. And I think if you'd asked us, we would have said, you know what, the model that English club football has is free market capitalism, and it's a bit rock and roll, and sometimes clubs go bust. But overall, if you take a long view and look at the 120 odd years since the league was begun, What's it delivered? It has delivered the biggest, most successful league pyramid, 5 fully professional leagues in England. No country can match that. And there's something to be said for that point of view, but it changed while I was there. And one of the things which really changed our perspective was, very sadly, Portsmouth Football Club went into administration. And I think all of us at the Premier League thought, it just cannot be right that a Premier League club, with the revenues that a Premier League club has, should be able to go into administration. So we started, and that was a matter of conscience, I thought. It really was a matter of values and principle. It's just not right. So we started bringing in more governance requirements around who could own clubs, around clubs' business plans, and introducing more scrutiny of those, around club profitability and sustainability. We banned the third-party ownership of players, which I'm super proud of, because we were the first football organisation in the world to do that, and FIFA followed suit years later after a lot of advocacy by us. So my job evolved into one where we had to design policy, rules, regulation that was fit for purpose, that went as far as it needed to prevent things like clubs going into administration, but no further. It's always like a balancing act. You don't want to over-regulate. You want to leave clubs free to act, but you also want to protect the good of the league and make sure that nobody's doing something here off the pitch which might harm somebody else over here. But I really enjoyed it. It was a great challenge. And involved a lot of horizon scanning, and things would pop up which you never thought you'd never anticipated that might happen, but it has, and we need to react. We need to think, is this a good thing? Yes, no. If no, what do we do about it? Should we be acting to prevent it happening again? Worked with a great team. Mike Foster was my boss, and he was very supportive. Richard Goodmore was the CEO, and the clubs were great to work with, and there was a great kind of collective feel around the clubs. And I have often seen clubs in a Premier League meeting put their hands up to vote for something which actually works against the interests of that particular club, but is in the interest of the greater good of the Premier League as a whole.
Interesting. Now, you at this point, it feels to me that for somebody that didn't have an interest or an ambition to work in football, you're now completely entrenched in it, right at the epicenter of it. But then your career takes a sideways move again, because you go off to UK sport, which is a very different beast.
Yeah. So this was the reason why. So I'd done 10 years at the Premier League, and people must look at that and go, as a sports lawyer, as a football lawyer, it doesn't get better. It just doesn't get better than that. Why would you want to move? But if I'm absolutely honest, Mark, I was getting a little bit bored. And there was a key moment. I remember it was late August, and I was just at home with my other half. And it was about a week before the transfer window closed. And we were just doing some domestic diary planning. And he went, oh, and of course, next week, it's the 31st of August, last day of the window. So you'll be staying up in London, because I work late, to deal with the close of the window. And I just went, oh, God. And I caught myself short. I thought, wow, this is actually the best, the most brilliant, the sexiest part of the job, doing the last night of the window. Am I actually feeling a bit, oh, God. And I counted up, and it was the 20th one I would have done, 20th last day of the window. And I just had to have a conversation with myself and say, Jane, I think it's time to move on, because you're not bringing freshness and enthusiasm to this. So the opportunity at UK Sport came up, and that was a governance function as well. And it was very much a sideways move, and an opportunity to actually do something not completely dissimilar, but with the governing bodies of all the British Olympic and Paralympic sports, working closely with Sport England. So yeah, I moved there in 2015. Again, another really tough decision, like leaving Sunderland. Very tough decision. But I felt it was right. I felt it would give me a new challenge. I felt it would give me insight into other sports, which it did. And again, I always say to young people who are thinking of building a career in sport, other sports are available. You can have a fantastic career in athletics or cycling or swimming or any of these big sports. So yeah, moved to UK sport, really enjoyed it.
I mean, that whole sort of reinvention that we keep having to do, and how our perspectives can change. We've got the bank in front of us, but then suddenly that's not as glitzy as it once was. How have you kind of reinvented yourself over the years as you've moved through these roles? Does it take that external reference of switching a job, or have there been moments when you've had to sort of change from within?
Yes, 100% change from within. Every new role, I think, involves some introspection and thinking, really deep thinking about how am I going to approach this. Sometimes you need to do that when you're in a role, absolutely, particularly one where you're there for 10 years like I was at the Premier League, and my job at the end was completely different from my job at the beginning. And I was lucky to have some kind of formal interventions. UEFA invited me to join a leadership program, which was superb and life-changing, and that involved it was brilliant, Mark. It was brilliant. And that involves some really deep introspection, looking at your values, looking at who you really are, developing your leadership style, thinking about what it means to be a leader, because I was getting to the stage where I was a leader, right? You know, I was leading people in terms of managing a team, but also leading in terms of being a voice in the industry and a respected voice. So thinking about all of that, how do you approach that? And it is really important. And I think this is part of my point about you never stop learning, and you have to keep learning and keep being open to it. So I don't know if this is good news or bad news for students, but you're not done when you've done your degree, I'm afraid. You have to keep going, and you have to seek out those opportunities and find the ones that you need. And the work stops being academic in the sense of you read a book and then you recite it like you do in, you know, exams. It starts being a bit more personal. What does this mean to me? And what am I going to do? How am I going to be in response to this? But brilliant. I've loved it all. I've loved all of those moments and all of that thinking.
So come on, I want you to share some of the bits from the FIFA course with us then. Who are you? What are your values and beliefs? What are your core principles that mean you've had this long and illustrious career and still are at a very high level in a profession that everybody would love, or most people would love to work in? Who are you? What are you all about?
Well, one of the values that really drives me, and again, I only discovered this after introspection, but one of the values that really drives me, and one of the reasons why I have done what I've done in football, is not because I love football. It's not because it's sport. It's actually because I have a really deep ethic of doing stuff in the public service and for the public good. Yeah, I should have been a nurse. Do you know what I mean? Not a footballer, I should have been a nurse.
Still time with the twist your career has had, still time, you know, 3-5 years training, whatever, we can get you in there.
Needed now more than ever, but anyway. So yes, public service. And when I think the thing when I was at Sunderland, the thing that drove me is that I thought, I'm a fan and I know what it's like to be a fan of this club, and I want to make this club as great as it can be, or play my part in making it as great as it can be for the fans. At the Premier League, in the governance role, it was the same. I thought, but on a bigger scale, I thought, you know, football plays such an enormous part in national life and is so important to people. And I want to be able to look any football fan in the eye and say, I promise you about the Premier League, every penny that comes into it, every penny that goes out of it, we know who it's come from, who it's going to. UK sport, that role involved working with an organisation which distributes public money, you know, your money, my money, tax money, lottery money to sport. And I was driven by thinking, you know what, I'm going to make sure you and I, the British taxpayer, we get a decent bloody return on this, not just in terms of sporting outcomes, but we get organisations that are run well, that are run best in the world. We're going for world-class standard here. So that's one of the things that really drives me. I think when I look back, I've been an innovator and driven change insofar as one can in what some people might think a very dry subject, football rules and regulations, but I found it fascinating. And I think there's a playful...
Don't you think you're going to start reciting any of them or anything like that? We'll leave that at the door, okay?
If I ever do mastermind, it'll be my specialist subject.
Oh, no. No. Sorry, I interrupted you.
The playful side, where that comes in is that sometimes you can have an idea. One of my former bosses said to me, he said, Jane, one of your strengths is you have these ideas. I call them your Sputniks. You fling them off into orbit. And I thought, what lovely feedback. And then he said, most of them are crap. Brought me right back to hers. But he said, 1 in every 10 is an absolute gem. And the playfulness comes in, I think, having creative ideas and flinging it out, saying, what would happen if we do this, if we do that? And sometimes just pushing it until someone stops you. And how far can I get with this idea? And just keep going until you really do hit a roadblock. So I've really enjoyed that. But yeah, it's a question of values and that public service thing. Now, in terms of leadership, the things I learned on the UEFA course, very much about authenticity, that you're only credible to people when you're speaking authentically. It really comes from someone within you, which doesn't mean you're always the same person, because all of us we can have different moods. We can choose to bring some out or not, depending on the circumstances. And the other thing which I learned, and I've had a lot of training on over the years, is coaching, not sports coaching, more kind of executive type coaching. And I find that really powerful. And I find it really powerful in conversations.
Could you just explain that? So that's somebody that could, through the power of questioning, help you to get from where you are to where you want to be, just through questioning your rationale and helping you formulate your own plan without actually giving you any advice. It works on the principle that it's all within.
Yes, exactly that, Mark. And a lot of listening. To do it well, you have to really listen to what people are telling you, and sometimes try to pick through the words to get the real story. And I first had some training at this at UK Sport, and they wanted all the line managers, people who manage teams, to start building this into how they line manage. I thought, well, surely as a line manager, you're more giving instructions. Please, can you do this task? And this is how you do it. And it completely revolutionized my thinking. Yeah, you still have to do that. If a job needs doing, you've got to get somebody to do it. But coaching works by treating them in an adult way, saying, here's the task. What do you think about it? How would you approach this? What might you find difficult about this? How can I help you with it? And it's so much more powerful. It really empowers the person. You can see them grow, and actually makes your life easier as the manager, because they know what they can do. They'll only come to you when they're really stuck. So frankly, you've got people fully empowered and encouraged to get on with stuff. And yeah, I found that a really powerful model coaching. I've had some more training at it quite recently at Women in Football as well.
Why your most recent career change? What were you thinking taking this role at Women in Football?
I thought Women in Football was an organisation I'd long respected, long known. He'd helped me on one occasion. And when this opportunity came up to be their first CEO, I knew straight away. I just grabbed it straight away. Well, I had to apply. I didn't grab it. I knew straight away that's what I want to do. And it's a strange one, Mark, because I'd always sworn I never want to be the CEO of anything, never. Because I'd seen CEOs in action. I thought, oh, that's all a bit tough and difficult. But I think when the right role comes along, and we're a small organisation, it's not like being the CEO of UK Sport or the Premier League, but we're a growing organisation. And I saw it as a chance to really develop the organisation and develop the game. That's what we're about. We're about changing the game for the better by making it more diverse. And that was just too good an opportunity to turn down.
Has there ever been a better time for women to get involved in football?
There has never been a better time, Mark. Never. The football is changing. We've seen what women's football is capable of in terms of, setting the nation alight and capturing its attention. They act as role models, those wonderful footballers in the WSL and the Lionesses. They're our kind of North Star because they normalise women in the game. That makes it easier for every woman working in an EFL or Premier League training ground or admin offices. There are plenty of clubs out there who will say to me, Jane, we just want the best talent. We don't care what it looks like, male, female, black, white, we don't care. We just want the best person for the job. We've got women's football growing, and that's going to need an enormous investment of kind of human capital, human talent to develop that. We're all a little worried about it now with the virus and how is it going to be, but it might take a little judder, but it's going to come back. It ain't going anywhere. And we don't at Women in Football encourage people just to build careers in women's football. We encourage people to build careers in all football, male professional football as much as women's football. But there's no doubt the growth area for jobs is going to be there, I think, in the women's game.
You just alluded to the COVID-19 virus. That's why we're both speaking from home. Apologies if you heard the bin men coming a short while ago during the course of this chat with Jane. Are you worried about the longer term ramifications? Might it slow down the growth in the women's game? Obviously, the Euros that were due to be held in the UK or in England in 2021 have got pushed back a year. Are you worried about squeeze on the growth as a result of all this, or is it too early to say?
I'm worried about all of football, not just women's football. I think everything you say about women's football is right. We were looking forward to an Olympic Games this year and then a home Euros to carry on the momentum from the World Cup last year. But if you look at male professional football, let's face it, the Premier League is still kind of the wellspring of all of it. It still funds, it's the source of revenue, not just for its own clubs, but it funds community programmes, youth development programmes, girls programmes across English football, all through the Football League, into the conference. And it's as soon as games stop being played, there's an immediate challenge to everybody's cash flow. So this has got to be a worry. I think we've put a couple of shout outs out in Women in Football to say, we want to hear your stories about this. If you've been both positive and negative, if you're having a bad time at work because of this, or if something's been done really well, we want to hear. And we've not had a lot back. And I suspect that's because things like the furlough scheme are working. They're looking after people. Nobody's where they want to be, if you're stuck at home. But people aren't thinking, those lucky enough to be on the furlough scheme, and I appreciate it doesn't apply to everybody. They're not thinking, well, I have to worry about my mortgage and where the next meal is coming from. What worries me is, as football reopens, I don't think we'll know the full economic impact on male and female elite football until we know when it's going to restart and on what basis. And I think we're going to have to be super alert to what that looks like and what the fallout could be. And it's unavoidable. We know that. And the world has bigger problems than when's football going to restart. I absolutely know that. But thinking about football, we've never experienced anything like this, and it is a concern.
Jane, if somebody is out there who sees herself as the next Jane Purdon, is 20 years back from where you are now, what would your sort of 3 golden nuggets of advice be for them to take into their embryonic stages of their career?
You've got to work hard. I'm afraid there's no alternative. You've just got to work super hard. You've got to take advice, like my best friend who by happenstance happened to see that job at Sunderland Football Club, and listen to people. Always apply for the job you think you're not going to get. Keep learning. That was 4, but let me reduce it down. Work hard, keep learning.
Work hard, keep learning, and take your chances.
Apply for the job you don't think you're going to get. Yeah, take a chance.
Jane Purdon, I have absolutely loved that. Good luck with all you're doing in the future, and thanks for talking to us.
Been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks to Jane Purdon, and thanks to you for watching. I'm Mark Clement. Join us again soon for another one of our UCFB Insight series.